Welcome to another episode of the Coffee Roaster Warm-Up Sessions podcast. My name is Mark Kotrovsky, and I'm hanging out with Sergey Kotrovsky. As always. Let's just dive right into it. Let's go ahead and pour some batch brew as always. If you're new to the podcast, welcome. It's a great time to start the beginning of a new year. So we usually start off with pouring some batch brew, some drip coffee, and talking about what we like about it, what we're tasting, what we're enjoying, what we're not enjoying. Oftentimes we're not enjoying, but yeah.
This is nice. I think it's okay. Yeah,
once again, not another unenjoyable experience. No,
it's okay. It's not that bad.
I think we should have gone finer. That's at least what I'm tasting.
Yeah.
It's a little under extracted, so it's tasting a little on the brighter end.
Yeah. Just lacks a little bit of sweetness. We could have got more out of it.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. But at the same time, I think this I think it's still packing up. Oh man. Yeah. Especially on the back end after you swallow, that aftertaste that comes back is like this like sweet kind of this floral. I'm still getting like a lot of like sweet lime. Like I'm reminded of like lime that you put on like your tacos. I don't know. Yeah. I don't know if that's not technically sweet, but I'm getting like a sweet version of that.
Nice little tang.
Yeah. Like no. There's like a stone fruit, but it's very mild. Mm-hmm. It's right. That's the body of it, but oh man,
there's something big about this coffee that holds it all together, and I can't really label it. I'm like, what am I tasting? Like it's very unique. Yeah, but the clarity's very high in this coffee.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think this coffee, we just cupped it not long ago, and it's like a coffee that you just come back over and over again. You're just like tasting, and you're like trying to figure it out, but it's like it's actually like very, very nicely complex and nuanced, and it has a flavor profile it's very interesting. I don't think I would say that this is like a common flavor experience for at least the coffee that I'm enjoying. Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah, it's a very unique coffee. I think the difficulty for me to pinpoint things, it's not that I can't taste them. I'm tasting so much, and I'm like borderline overwhelmed with trying to figure out what am I like tasting. But there's a lot.
And I think it's also not just that there's a lot. It's like an uncommon flavor profile.
Yeah.
I don't even know how to put it into put that into words. Like it's not like a classic, natural. Yeah. It's not like these coffees that, not to say that they're bad, but they're kind of familiar flavor experiences where where with this coffee, it's like it's zesty, it's bright in acidity, it's got some florals, it's got maybe picking up some some kind of like fruit there mildly that's kind of holding it kind of together almost, but all of that combined also is like I don't know.
Yeah, it's also not like we're making it sound very intense, but it's not natural intense. It's not like a oversaturated, like the saturation like turned up on flavor. It's not that, but it's vibrant. It's like exciting, but not in a natural way.
And when we talk about this also still has some rich florals to it.
And that right there, that sip, the very end where it's like cooled quite a bit, is so juicy, so rich in flavor. This is excellent. I don't want to overhype this coffee.
Me
either.
too. That's what I'm afraid
but
of.
But it kind of tastes like a very nice Kenyan.
Oh,
That's what it's reminding me of.
I don't know. I can see it, but I'm also like,
that's
it's also kind of a little misleading almost but I can see where that's coming from. Yeah. I don't know. I would even say actually, maybe even taking this a little, I'm thinking like roasting wise also would be interesting to take this a little further just to see what happens over the edge. It's kind of like, I don't know, what's the movie called, Over the Hedge? Is that it?
Yep, that's one.
What's it about? It's about like critters trying to crawl over the edge, right?
Yep.
They're trying to figure out what's beyond the hedge.
Right.
Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Avril Lavigne's in that movie. Yeah.
I haven't seen it in a long time, but that's also it's actually a podcast episode that I was thinking about doing is how do you know when you've reached the pinnacle of a coffee? How do you know when you've hit it?
$1,000,000 question.
Exactly. Yeah. And we've heard many different people talk about it in different ways. And sometimes you got to experiment and go there. But anyways, and this coffee is like intriguing because I'm like, ooh, like what happens if you just do this and this? But and that's simply because it's just so fun and enjoyable.
And the difficulty is like you pull one way, you lose on the other. Yeah. It's not always that easy and clean. Whether it's roasting or extracting. Yeah.
I think as it cools, it really changes. And once again, I don't want to overhype this coffee, but this is a banger. And we got a very small portion of it. It was the remaining last of already a small lot. It's a Guatemalan coffee. It's a Margot Gipe varietal. And it's just very nice. I think only one other roasting company has this coffee right now other than us, and it's a gem. We were able to secure a small amount of it, and
literally,
and so friends, it's gonna drop with our drop, and I'm excited. Once again, like we were cupping the coffees on the table, and every time going back to smell this, I was like, why is this so, like, is this supposed to be that like intriguing? I don't know. I don't know.
I mean, speaking of the drop, it didn't happen on 1, 1, 2, 3.
Unfortunately, but
bummer.
But I think, I think with a lot of things, sometimes you don't expect things to go certain ways. And if you've been around the podcast, we've had this conversation already because, like, for example, a video that we have that's actually performing really well on YouTube, other than our pour-over tutorial, it's 3 things we wish we knew when we started a coffee roasting company. And that's also like a very clear other, a very clear, what am I trying to say? It's a very clear example of what happens when you think it's going to go one way, or you think you're planning for something and then things come out of nowhere and you run into either, some challenges, or you run into stuff that you're like, man, I've never dealt with this before and I have no experience in this, and this is not my strong suit. This is not what I'm really good at, but you still have to figure it out, and what do you do in those cases? So,
and I think especially for us, personality wise, I think one of the major challenge or weakness for us is like actually overthinking things because we want things to be excellent, or when we're in a very bad spot, we want things to be perfect, and that's unattainable. So that tension of like, man, wanting this project and wanting things at Mirror to be at the highest degree possible. And sometimes for me, especially, I get paralyzed with the idea of like, man, what's the best? Like, can this coffee be roasted better? Can this coffee be extracted better? Is this batch like ultimate or not? And then anything within like our structure of how we run Mirror, I'm like, what could I do better? How much more can I invest? You know what I mean? So being caught up in that, and sometimes you can have like what I hear people call paralysis of analysis or analysis of, you know what I'm talking
Analysis
about?
paralysis.
There we go. That thing. And that's a challenging thing. I know for me, that can basically put me in a spot where I don't want to execute on anything because I'm like, it's not going to work out. It's going to fail.
Yeah. It's kind of like, you either want all or nothing.
Right.
But if it's a little too much to handle, then it's usually resorting to nothing, which is oftentimes whenever I catch myself going like, oh, whatever, it's not worth it at all because I feel like there's too much going on. Mm-hmm. I'm like, no, deep down, I know that's probably not the right way, because there's times when I've walked away from something where I'm like, even that done at 85% probably would have been better than zero.
Yeah.
And yeah, there's definitely a struggle, especially for our personality types, where we want things to be perfect and excellent and everything we've ever dreamed of. But at the end of the day, what we fail to see is that for that to happen is it's hard to accomplish that when there are noticeable weaknesses that both of us have. So it's this very rich contrast and tension of like, I want things to be perfect, but I also realizing, hey, I'm not perfect.
Yeah.
And that means I can't create something that's absolutely perfect. And so there are certain weaknesses or misunderstandings or misconceptions that are actually holding me back from accomplishing everything that I want.
Right.
And especially when you start comparing yourself to, whether that's other coffee companies or bigger brands or people that are doing much bigger things, who actually ultimately have probably been doing it for longer than you have, who have way more resources than you, who have way more access to other things than you, who are probably way smarter and way wiser, who have way more experience than you, who have way more all these things which they've built over years.
Yeah.
That allows them to execute on those things.
Yeah.
We just overlook them and think, well, let's just give it a go and everything's going to be perfect.
Yeah.
When in reality, there's real weaknesses and shortcomings that we kind of have to face.
Yeah.
And that's part of, I don't know, being in the entrepreneurial space, but also. Yeah.
Well, I think facing those weaknesses is like the first initial point, because it requires so much humility to be like, oh, I see this weakness and I'm not going to run from it. I'm actually going to take it on and go at it head on. You know what I mean? And see how you can actually work with your weakness instead of ignore it. And I think that is key. That's like, I mean, that's two things, like humility and self-awareness, and being able to look at that, approach it, and then move forward. Because a lot of the things that we've done is fairly scary stuff, like for us, going on a new endeavor, either like starting Mirror as a whole or starting new projects within Mirror, or even buying new coffees. Like some of the coffees that we've invested in, like it's scary and the way we manage that kind of fear and the way we manage those weaknesses and knowing like, man, how do we execute this properly and not just simply get freaked out by failure, but creating that safe space to be able to like give yourself grace, but also know like, man, I'm going to do my best and I'm going to trust that I can do a good job in this, whether that fulfills my expectations or it doesn't. So I think to me, that kind of experience is what really defines what it means to face your weaknesses instead of ignore them. Because ignoring my weaknesses would be like, you know what? I'm going to do what I know works. Like if I know how to roast Guatemalan coffees, I'm only going to buy Guatemalan coffees. I'll never veer off to buy like a Kenyan coffee, Does that make sense? That was a lot of words.
I think something to highlight, for those listening, and I know we have a handful of people who are just starting their roasting companies and their new endeavors. And it's cool that we've kind of drawn so many of these like fun, like startup, entrepreneurial, like we want to try something new crowd. Like it's exciting. But I will say, It's also not for everyone, because one thing I've noticed is that running a roasting company or running a business in general literally takes everything about who you are, puts it under this fat magnifying glass, and then shows it right back next to you, right back at you. Yeah. And you kind of have to face your weaknesses, face your failures, and you also have twice the joy, I think twice the excitement when things do work.
Yeah.
Because you're like, man, that is so satisfying. Yeah. Like, this is just from scratch. This is just me pursuing something and it's working. But on the flip side, that also means like when things are not working, things are not successful. Hey, at the end of the day, there is no one to blame.
Right. That's true.
And that means that, there's a big fat magnifying glass that says, you did something wrong here, you did something wrong there, you're not doing this, you're not doing that. And at the end of the day, it is what it is, kind of. And that's so hard. And I think same with roasting as well. Same with a lot of things. When you're at the kind of at the helm of the ship, or when you're at the leading something, whether that's your personal life or roasting or your business or whatever it is, at some point you're gonna have to face these things, because it's either you did something or you didn't, and you figured it out or you didn't, or you made a mistake here or you didn't. And I think at some point, a part of facing your fears and facing your weaknesses, you have to at some point become comfortable with failure, and you have to become comfortable with not being perfect all the time. And being comfortable with the fact that you do have weaknesses and you will fail, and there are some holes in your ability. That's something that you actually have to and it's not something that you necessarily have to put yourself down for, but you have to be comfortable in that space.
Yeah, and I think being comfortable with your failure isn't necessarily the idea of you wanting to fail. Like, we don't expect to fail. Like, we don't do things with a desire to fail. That just sounds ridiculous even, you know? We do things because we want to succeed. We have that drive. We have the passion to succeed. But understanding that failure is always, like, in that realm. It could possibly, like, we had a whole episode, or we talked a lot on the podcast about, like, what would happen if Mirror failed, kind of thing. So like we're aware of that, and that's a big part, and that kind of allows me to be, it kind of holds everything in tension, if that makes sense, and allows me to be more of a problem solver. It almost, like, that fear of failure is almost a motivator, where I'm like, I want to succeed, and I know that if I don't succeed, I'll fail. Like, that doesn't destroy me, but the desires to continue moving forward and going forward. And I think some of the things, I've been talking to a friend who's also becoming a new cafe owner, and watching them basically start learning and asking all of these, like, questions that I'm like, man, that's smart, because I didn't ask that question when I was in that place. I didn't even know the question. And knowing that you have a group of people around you that are basically your mirrors, that you can, like, see your blind spots because you don't have, eyes in the back of your head. So knowing you have that, and creating those boundaries, and creating a structure of accountability where you could face problems, you could face challenges, knowing that you can't conquer every single challenge alone, you can rely on those things. And that's where, like, managing that area of your weakness is, like, nearly impossible to do it by yourself. You need a team of people. And for us, that has been when, like, both of us help one another. Like, we kind of grown to know each other's weaknesses, but also having other people in our lives that surround us, that get to speak into those different areas, whether directly or indirectly, I think is also a big thing. And again, I feel like we're repeating a lot of stuff we've said on other podcasts, but I think it's really important to focus on that, because of what you said. Like, a lot of folks, especially in the new year, may have these hopes and desires. I'm going to launch my coffee company this year, or I'm going to do this in coffee. What I would say is realize that you do have weaknesses, embrace that realization and create accountability to be able to move through and move in those weaknesses.
Over the holidays, we had some friends over and some family over. And I was asked with that question, is like, man, what happens if, 10 years into Mirror fails, like, and it was all a waste of time? And it's a very real question actually to ask.
Yeah.
But I think where my mind goes is, I'm totally fine with that. And at the same time, I'm not fine with it at all.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I think that tension of saying, man, I'm going to fight for this specific thing, like my life depends on it. But if it fails, it's not that big of a deal. Mm-hmm. Life goes on. Being in between those two and realizing both of them forces some kind of balance in your life.
Yeah.
And a balance of, things like just like humility and confidence and boldness and humility and ambition and being very realistic with yourself, but also allowing your space for yourself to dream and vision outside of your capabilities.
Yeah, exactly.
Knowing, hey, I'm not super qualified for this position, but at the same time, I'm thinking 15 years ahead when we're massive. Like holding both of those together, I think is important, because when you just get too high in your own supply and you think you're on top of the world,
exactly,
probably not going to last very long.
Yep.
But then also when you are too focused on why you're not good enough and why you're not going to make it, or why you have all these weaknesses and you're not capable of doing this, you'll never ever start.
Yeah.
That's the reality of it. And at some point you have to, you have to be able to balance the two. Yeah. And I think actually these are some of the stuff that you won't learn in college, actually,
or a textbook.
There will, think, I've never read any, but I don't think that there's, a book on economics, a textbook on economics that says, hey, here are some of the emotional skills or mental skills that you need to have to be a successful, business person or whatever.
Yeah.
That, like those things, but they're also, I think some of these things are make or break.
For sure.
Yep. And they're also very beneficial, I think, in everyday life as well.
Yep.
And so figuring out how to face your weaknesses and not allowing that to scare you is extremely important.
Yeah, and I think being honest with yourself is key to humility. It's not necessarily like just thinking of yourself less all the time and being like, man, Mirror coffee is not as good as, Prodigal coffee, or, you know what I mean? Or, Mirror coffee is not as good as the other favorite roaster that we've been drinking.
Yeah.
It's not that. It's realistically looking at like, oh, Mirror coffee is this good. This is where we're at, you know, and being honest with that. That's really, really hard, but that is so important. And then taking that and being like, okay, this is what Mirror is. This is what our product, this is what our brand, this is partially of who we are in this present moment. That is also like a place where we're at today, not where we were yesterday, and most likely not where we're going to be tomorrow or the next year. And holding that all in tension and being like, okay, I want to figure this out. This is where I'm at. And these are the steps that I'm going to take to basically conquer this challenge. Like, how do we become prodigal? If that's the grading, if that's a level thing, you know what I mean? I had a friend ask me recently to kind of rate, what are if on a scale of 1 to 10, what are these cafes or coffee brands or coffee companies in like the 9 and 10 range? Can you name some for like aesthetic, taste, and all these categories? I went through of them, and honestly, I'll be honest with you, I didn't put Mirror on any of them. And it's not that I don't think Mirror belongs on that list. It's a more or less like I have these other brands that I believe in that I look up to. And I want to hold that intention as vision, but I also want to realize that I feel like we're doing pretty darn good for being 3 years in this and launching it and crushing it. I think we're doing good, and I believe that. But I also know, like, man, I think we're going to be so much better in like 2 years.
A meme that is kind of that beautifully communicates this tie of like self-awareness and humility together, communicates it in modern day 2022 language, is this meme that's been going around is like, when you look back 2 years ago at your 3 years ago at your photos and you cringe at them, thinking that you won't cringe about the photo you are taking today
always.
In 3 years.
Scroll down Instagram.
Yeah. It's, and that's, I think, beautifully said. It's this, you're looking back at old photos and you're like, man, I can't believe that was me like 10 years ago and like, 8th grade or whatever. And then you're like realizing that, oh wait, 10 years from now, I'm going to look back at today and be cringing as much. Mm-hmm. But you're so far ahead of where you were.
Yeah.
And so, I think holding that together and balancing that out, I think, is very important. And leads to a lot of good things, I think.
I think reflecting and looking back and kind of holding the past as a form of something that keeps you accountable to continue moving forward is like super important. It's also like not easy. Like I hate scrolling down my Instagram down to my very first posts. Mm-hmm. It is cringy. It's like, it's tough to look at, but there's something refreshing about it and then intimidating about it too. And being like, man, I believed in that, but it wasn't actually that great. But it's okay because I actually shot these photos this week and I really enjoy these photos. And I guarantee that's going to change in the future, So allowing that past to be a source of accountability for you to keep moving forward, and then realizing that, man, you may not have everything together today. I think that's great. I mean, I think that's a very positive way in managing your weaknesses, but then also looking at challenges and not being blinded by, everything that you're good at, quote unquote.
I've said this on the podcast before, but it's something that I definitely think about and hold dear to myself a lot, is that I don't want to arrive at my max capacity right now. Mm-hmm. That would be a depressing next 50 years of my life till I die. That would just suck. Mm-hmm. And for me, that means that, oh wait, if I don't want that, then there's room that I need to grow. And growing always has growth pains attached to it. And there's always a lot of learning and a lot of facing your weaknesses and stuff like this. And so that's part of the process. And that's not something to shy away from. And that's something to actually embrace and know that this is what it takes to get there. Mm-hmm. And knowing that this is the recipe. This is the recipe.
Yeah.
How to make that tasty, pour over, or this is the recipe to make that tasty soup, or, soup. It's like you need those things.
Yeah.
And if you don't have them, the soup doesn't taste good.
Yeah.
And so I don't want to finish that right now. Yeah. I don't want to get there right now. I want like another 15, 20 years of good, solid growth before I arrive, and then it's downhill from there.
I mean, that's such a great perspective, because from what I hear you say and what I hear us talking about is you can actually change your perspective on weakness and use it as a motivator, which allows you to actually dig in deeper and look for more weaknesses, because if all of your weaknesses are motivators to success, then bring it on. Like, you know what I mean? I want to know how I can get better today, tomorrow, forever.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it becomes not a scary thing. Like the fear behind it goes away, and then it becomes a form of inspiration where you're like, hey, and then it also allows you to be so much more vulnerable with people around you, knowing that if your weaknesses are inspiring to you, they could be inspiring to someone else that's listening to the podcast and wants to start a business.
For sure.
You know what I mean? Or is about to take over a cafe or buy a cafe.
For sure.
It becomes motivators not to only you, but now that vulnerability allows others to find inspiration from your weaknesses.
And I think it also helps you, maybe not just to face your weaknesses, to, you know, to get those weaknesses into strengths. Maybe that's not even the case.
Exactly.
Maybe the actual growth is in realizing your weaknesses and then realizing how to work with them and deal with them.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's incorporating different people into it that can help support you in those in those areas that can actually that's where that's their strength.
Right.
Maybe it's just figuring out how to shift things around, and then now all of a sudden it's not only has become a motivator for you, not only has it become something that's like a driving force to you, but it's actually built inside of you the ability to solve problems at a very efficient and unstoppable, unobstructive way. And I guarantee you that if you can figure out how to create in yourself, build in yourself a character that can look for those weaknesses and be able to adjust accordingly to those weaknesses and solve those problems, there is probably nothing on the face of the earth that you could probably not accomplish.
Yeah.
Because issues just become irrelevant.
Yeah.
It is no longer a thing of what can I not do, but more of what do I need to do to be able to make it happen.
Yeah.
And that's it.
Yeah. And if that's the culture you create, then imagine like all the other people on your team are going to replicate that as well. So now they're going to look at their weaknesses and find other people to support them in their weaknesses. And then, it becomes a powerhouse. It becomes so dynamic. It becomes so much like big. I'm not talking about bigger as in like longer or taller, but more like quad dimensional. You know what I mean? You start to just exponentially expand. And I mean, that's beautiful. Like that's the goal. It would be awful if you just, grew one way, like just like up or just like to the left and that's it. And you're just this dash of a line and that's all of your growth just summed up in a very linear way. But if you start growing exponentially, then it's almost like, not to throw around quantum, but it's like multi-dimensional. It just starts expanding.
If you didn't mention it, I would have. So
exactly.
And I think that if you've been listening, if you made it this far, thank you. But if you've been listening, you'll quickly realize that this is actually like that meme on TikTok, the trend, like when somebody says something, but they're like, hey, this isn't about X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
It's like, you can say like, hey, this is about running a business and being an entrepreneur, but I would say this isn't about that.
Right. Fair.
It's so much bigger. And so take what you can. There you have it. Any last words?
Oh, we're going to leave it there. I said quantum. That's enough.
That's it. Alrighty, friends. Thank you so much for joining us for another tasty episode of the Coffee Roaster Warm Sessions podcast. Friends, keep your eyes peeled for a drop coming this week or next week, any day now. Follow us on Instagram. Subscribe to us on YouTube. Drop some stars if you like this podcast. Give us some reviews. Share it on Instagram if you think this is worth listening to, or share this with somebody who might need some encouragement in this. I actually would love it if somebody shared this with me. Like if somebody sent me an episode like this, I would have been like, dude, you're a real one. You're a good friend.
Dude, how many DMs are you going to get with this episode?
Yeah. Alrighty, folks. Thank you so much for listening. And remember, as always, reflect what's good. You picked up a mason jar?
What? Switched it up.